farmer and his dog find an old carriage in the woods, but the glimmer reveals something incredible. Robert James Thompson never imagined that a simple morning walk with his faithful companion Ranger would change his life forever. At 58 years old, the farmer lived a quiet routine on his rural property on the outskirts of Aspen until something extraordinary caught his attention on that September morning. It was Ranger who first sniffed something different. The dark-coated German shepherd began barking toward an area of the woods that Robert had never fully explored. Intrigued by the animal's unusual behavior, the farmer decided to follow the trail his companion was indicating. "What is it, Ranger?" murmured Robert, adjusting the orange shirt he wore against the morning chill. "Did you find something interesting out there?" The dog kept barking, running a few yards ahead and coming back, as if trying to guide his owner to a specific spot. Robert knew his 300-acre property well, but that part of the woods had always remained unexplored due to the rugged terrain and dense vegetation. As they walked among the ancient trees, Robert began to notice that the sunlight filtered through the branches in a peculiar way, creating a golden glow that seemed to come from somewhere further ahead. Ranger suddenly stopped and began sniffing the air more intensely. "Easy, boy," said Robert, petting the dog's head. "Let's see what's there." When they reached a small natural clearing, Robert felt his heart race. In the middle of the vegetation, partially covered by vines and leaves, was an old wooden carriage with golden details that gleamed in the sunlight. The sight was so surreal that he had to blink several times to make sure he wasn't dreaming. The carriage was magnificent, with tall wooden and metal wheels, a closed cabin with glass windows still intact, and golden ornaments that sparkled as if they had been recently polished. What impressed Robert most was the vehicle's state of preservation, which seemed to have been abandoned for decades but still retained all its original beauty. "What in the world?" whispered the farmer, slowly approaching the carriage. Ranger kept barking, but now more restrained, as if he too was impressed by the discovery. Robert walked around the vehicle, observing every detail. On the sides, there were intricate coats of arms and what appeared to be initials carved into the wood. Gently touching the carriage door, Robert noticed it wasn't locked. Carefully, he opened the small door and peered inside. What he saw left him even more perplexed. Red leather seats, still in perfect condition, velvet curtains on the windows, and on the floor, a small brown leather case. "Ranger, this isn't normal," said Robert, looking at the dog who was now sitting and watching attentively. "A carriage like this, in this condition, in the middle of our woods." The farmer knew his property had been bought from a traditional local family 20 years ago, but he had never heard about carriages or any special history related to the land. The Fitzgerald family, who had sold the property, had always been reserved and hadn't provided many details about the place's past. Deciding to investigate further, Robert picked up the case from the carriage floor. It was heavy and had golden metal clasps that looked old but functional. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the first clasp, then the second. Inside the case he found papers yellowed with age, some black and white photographs, and what looked like a hand-drawn map. The photographs showed elegantly dressed people next to the same carriage, from times Robert estimated to be from the early last century. One of the photographs especially caught his attention. In it, an elderly man with a white mustache stood beside the carriage with a young woman in a white dress. On the back of the photo, delicate handwriting read, "William Fitzgerald and Elizabeth, 1943. "Fitzgerald," murmured Robert. "It's the same family that sold the property." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. Robert's heart began to beat faster. If that was truly a Fitzgerald family carriage, why had it been abandoned in the woods? And why had no one mentioned its existence when the property was sold? Continuing to examine the papers, Robert found what appeared to be a letter, written in the same delicate handwriting as the photograph. The ink had faded, but most of the text was still readable. "My dear William," the letter began, "I keep our most precious moments in this carriage, hoping that one day you will return to claim what is rightfully ours. Our family's treasure is safe, but my heart will not find peace until you come back home." The letter was signed by Elizabeth and dated December 1943. Robert reread the text several times, trying to understand its meaning. What treasure? Why had William left? And what had happened to Elizabeth? Ranger began to sniff something near the carriage wheels, catching Robert's attention. As he bent down to see what interested the dog, the farmer noticed that one of the stones near the carriage looked different from the others. It was darker and seemed to have been placed there intentionally. With some effort, Robert managed to move the stone, revealing a small compartment dug into the ground. Inside, he found a rusty but still intact metal box. His hands trembled as he opened the box and discovered more papers, some old jewelry, and a more detailed map of the property. The map showed the exact location of the carriage and marked other points on the property with symbols Robert couldn't decipher. One of the points was marked with a red X and the word house written beside it. House? Robert said aloud, making Ranger perk up his ears. What house? The farmer knew every inch of his property, or at least he thought he did. There was no house besides his own residence and the small shed where he kept farming equipment. Deciding to investigate the location marked on the map, Robert carefully stored all the documents in the original case and, along with Ranger, began walking in the indicated direction. The map was surprisingly accurate, showing details of the topography that Robert recognized perfectly. After walking for about 15 minutes, they reached an area of the property that Robert rarely visited. It was a small valley between two hills, covered with dense vegetation and some fruit trees that had grown wild over the years. Ranger began to bark again, this time more urgently. The dog ran toward a cluster of bushes and started digging with his front paws. Intrigued, Robert approached and began pushing the vegetation aside with his hands. Under the bushes, he discovered the remains of what had clearly been a structure. Foundation stones were still in place, and the outlines of what had been a small house were visible. Vegetation had grown over and around the structure, completely hiding it from casual view. Incredible, murmured Robert, walking through the remains of the building. There really was a house here. While exploring the ruins, Robert found more evidence of the former dwelling. Fragments of roof tiles, pieces of wood still preserved, and even an old well that had been covered with stones. The discovery was generating more questions than answers. Why was there a house in that location? Who had lived there? And what was the connection between this house, the carriage, and the Fitzgerald family? Robert decided he needed more information. He stored everything he had found and returned home, where he spent the rest of the day researching the Fitzgerald family and the history of their estate. In the small library of Aspen, Robert found some old records that mentioned the Fitzgerald family. According to the documents, they had been an influential family in the region during the early decades of the 20th century, owners of several coffee plantations and involved in local commerce. One of the records mentioned William Fitzgerald as a prosperous businessman who had mysteriously disappeared in 1943, leaving behind a young wife and a considerable fortune. Elizabeth Fitzgerald had sold most of the family properties in the years following her husband's disappearance. So that was it, Robert said to himself, closing the record book. William disappeared and Elizabeth was left alone. But that still didn't explain the carriage in the woods or the hidden house. Robert knew he needed to find more information, and the only person who could help him was someone from the Fitzgerald family itself. The next day, Robert decided to look for Catherine Fitzgerald, the youngest daughter of the family who still lived in town. Catherine was now 72 years old and lived in a small house in downtown Aspen, where she worked as a retired seamstress. Knocking on the door of Catherine's small house, Robert felt nervous. How to explain that he had found a mysterious carriage on her property, and how to ask about family secrets that might be painful for the elderly lady. Catherine answered the door wearing a floral apron and reading glasses hanging around her neck. She was a small woman with graying hair pulled into a low bun, with dark eyes that still held liveliness despite her age. "Good morning, Mrs." "Catherine," Robert greeted, taking off his hat. "I'm Robert Thompson, the current owner of your family's former estate." "Oh, yes," Catherine replied with a gentle smile. "I remember when we sold the property. Please come in. Would you like some coffee?" Robert entered the small living room decorated with antique furniture and family photographs. On the walls, there were portraits of people he recognized from the photographs found in the carriage. "Mrs. Catherine," Robert began, after accepting a cup of coffee, "I found something interesting on my property, and I was wondering if you could help me understand what it means." Catherine sat in a wooden armchair and looked at Robert with curiosity. "What did you find?" "An old carriage," Robert said directly, "in the middle of the woods, along with some documents and photographs of your family." Catherine's face changed immediately. The gentle expression gave way to a mix of surprise and something that seemed like melancholic nostalgia. "A carriage," she repeated softly. "Golden with tall wheels and red leather seats." "Exactly that one," Robert confirmed. "You know this carriage?" Catherine slowly stood up and walked to an antique dresser in the corner of the room. From a drawer, she took out a small wooden box and returned to her seat. "That carriage," she said, opening the box, "belonged to my grandfather, William Fitzgerald." Inside the box, Catherine showed more photographs of the same carriage, some antique jewelry, and a golden key. "My grandmother Elizabeth told me the story many times when I was a child," Catherine continued. "Grandfather William didn't disappear as everyone thought. He left on a business trip to New York City in 1943, but never reached his destination." Robert leaned forward, interested in the story. "What happened to him?" "According to Grandma Elizabeth, he had hidden something very valuable on the property before leaving," explained Catherine. "Something that would secure the family's future. But he never returned to reveal where it was hidden. And the carriage. It was Grandpa's favorite vehicle," said Catherine with a sad smile. "He used it to go to the city and for special outings with my grandmother. After he left, Grandma Elizabeth took the carriage to a special spot on the property and hid it, saying it would be a symbol of hope for when he returned." Robert showed Catherine some of the photographs he had found in the carriage. The elderly lady examined each one carefully, her eyes filling with tears as she recognized her grandparents' faces. "This one is my favorite," said Catherine, holding the photograph where William and Elizabeth posed beside the carriage. "It was taken on their wedding anniversary day, just a few months before Grandpa's departure." "Mrs. Catherine," said Robert carefully, "I also found a letter from your grandmother mentioning a treasure. Do you have any idea what it could be?" Catherine remained silent for a few moments, as if deciding whether to share something important. "Grandpa William was a very cautious man," she said finally. "He always talked about protecting the family against hard times. In the years leading up to his departure, he had mentioned to Grandma Elizabeth that he was storing something valuable, but he never revealed what it was or where it was." "And your grandmother never found this treasure?" "Never," replied Catherine. "She spent years searching but eventually gave up. She sold the properties one by one to support the family. When I was a teenager, she sold the farm where you live now." Robert realized that Catherine was being honest with him, but felt there were more details to the story. He decided to share with her everything he had found, including the map and the location of the hidden house. "Mrs. Catherine," he said, "I also found the remains of a small house on the property in a location indicated on the map. Do you know of any building that existed there?" Catherine's eyes widened. "A house? Where exactly?" Robert described the location, and Catherine stood up abruptly. "Oh my God," she said, bringing her hand to her chest. "You found Elizabeth's house." "Elizabeth's house?" "When Grandpa William built the main farm," explained Catherine, "he also built a smaller house for my grandmother, a place where she could have privacy for her hobbies and to receive friends. It was her personal retreat." Robert began to understand. The hidden house wasn't just any building, but a special place for Elizabeth. And if William had hidden something valuable, it made sense that it would be in a place meaningful to his wife. "Mrs. Catherine," said Robert, "I'd like you to come with me tomorrow to see the carriage and the remains of the house. Perhaps together we can discover what your grandfather hid." Catherine hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. "Yes," she said with determination. "It's time to discover the truth about what happened to our family's treasure. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The next morning, Robert went to pick up Catherine at her house. The lady had dressed in practical clothes for the hike in the woods and carried a small bag with some personal items, including the golden key she had shown the day before. During the trip to the carriage, Catherine shared more details about her family. She told how Elizabeth had been a very religious and superstitious woman who believed in signs and symbols. Whenever she faced difficult decisions, she would look for clues in nature or in meaningful objects. Grandma Elizabeth had a diary, mentioned Catherine as they walked along the trail. She wrote down everything: dreams, coincidences, small events she considered important. Unfortunately, we never found that diary after she passed away. When they reached the clearing where the carriage was, Catherine stopped abruptly and remained silent for several minutes. Her hands trembled slightly as she approached the vehicle she hadn't seen in over 50 years. "It's exactly as I remember," she said with a choked voice. "Grandpa was so proud of this carriage, he polished every golden detail himself." Ranger, who had accompanied Robert and Catherine, began sniffing around the carriage with the same interest as the day before. The dog seemed to have developed a special connection with that place. Catherine walked around the carriage, gently touching the golden ornaments and examining every detail. When she reached the rear of the vehicle, she stopped and pointed at something Robert hadn't noticed before. "Look here," she said, indicating a small coat of arms carved into the wood. "This is our family symbol. Grandpa used to draw it on everything he considered important." The coat of arms showed a stylized tree with deep roots and branches stretching in all directions. Around the tree there were some Latin words Robert couldn't decipher. "Fortis et fidelis per tempus," read Catherine. "It means strong and faithful through time." It was our family motto. Robert observed the coat of arms more closely and noticed that the drawn tree had specific characteristics that seemed familiar. The roots were represented in a particular way, with curves and branching, that reminded him of something he'd seen recently. "Mrs. Catherine," he said with growing excitement, "this drawing of the roots, it looks like the shape of the terrain where we found the remains of Elizabeth's house." Catherine looked at Robert with interest. "What do you mean?" Robert took from his backpack the map he had found in the carriage and spread it over the vehicle's hood. With his finger, he traced the lines representing the contours of the property around Elizabeth's old house. "See?" he said, comparing the map with the coat of arms. "The curves of the terrain follow exactly the same pattern as the roots drawn on the coat of arms." Catherine examined both drawings, and her face lit up with an expression of understanding. "Grandpa William always said our family had deep roots in this land," she said. "Perhaps he used this as a clue." Deciding to investigate this theory, Robert and Catherine walked to the remains of Elizabeth's house. This time they examined the site much more carefully, looking for patterns or structures that might match the coat of arms design. Ranger kept sniffing around the ruins, focusing especially on an area near the old well. The dog began digging again, this time with even more determination. "Ranger found something," said Robert, approaching the spot where the dog was digging. Catherine joined them, and together they began removing dirt and stones from the location indicated by the dog. After a few minutes of digging, they found a buried stone structure that had clearly been built intentionally. "It's some kind of chamber," observed Catherine, wiping dirt off one of the stones. "Grandpa was known for his ingenious constructions." The structure turned out to be a small underground chamber, carefully built with fitted stones and sealed to protect its contents from moisture and time. On the top of the chamber, there was a larger stone with the same family coat of arms carved into it. Robert and Catherine worked together to open the chamber. Inside, they found a large, heavy metal box wrapped in waxed cloth for additional protection. The box was locked with an old padlock that seemed to require a specific key. "The golden key," said Catherine, taking the object from her bag. "I always knew it was meant for something important." The key fit perfectly into the padlock, which opened with a satisfying click despite the years. Inside the box, Robert and Catherine discovered something that exceeded all their expectations. The box contained historical documents, property deeds, stock certificates, and a significant amount of jewelry and gold coins. But the most surprising item was a thick leather-bound volume, Eleanor's lost diary. "Grandma's diary," Catherine sighed, picking up the volume with reverence. All these years searching for it, and it was here all along. Robert examined the other items in the box, while Catherine leafed through the diary. The documents showed that William had been far more prosperous than imagined, owning stakes in several companies and properties that extended well beyond the Aspen region. "Listen to this," said Catherine, reading a passage from the diary. "William hid our legacy where our roots run deepest, where he built my little paradise. He said that if anything happened to him, I should look where our family tree meets the land that welcomed us." "So he really planned it all," Robert said with admiration. "He knew something might happen and prepared this place as a guarantee for the family." Catherine continued reading and discovered more details about William's disappearance. According to Elizabeth, he had gone to New York City not just for business, but because he had received threats from people who wanted to seize his properties. "He promised he would return in 6 months," Catherine read, "but it's been 2 years now. I fear something terrible has happened to my dear husband. I've decided to hide everything he prepared for us, hoping that perhaps someday someone in the family might find this treasure and continue the legacy of our lineage." Robert realized he was witnessing a very emotional moment for Catherine. The discovery not only solved a decades-old mystery, but also provided closure to questions that had haunted her family for generations. "Mrs. Catherine," he said gently, "this treasure belongs to your family. It is your rightful inheritance." Catherine looked at Robert with gratitude but shook her head. "Mr. Robert," she said, "you found this on your property, through your own efforts. Besides, I'm already an elderly lady. What would I do with a fortune at this stage of my life?" "But it's your family's inheritance," Robert insisted. "Yes," Catherine agreed, "but I also believe it was no coincidence that you found all this. Grandma Elizabeth always said that important things come to the right people at the right time." Catherine proposed a solution that surprised Robert. She suggested they split the inheritance, but in a special way. Robert would keep the properties and investments that could generate income, while she would take the jewelry, personal items, and, most importantly, Elizabeth's diary. "For me," Catherine explained, "what holds the most value are the memories and stories of my family. The jewelry I can leave to my grandchildren, and the diary will give me the chance to finally know all my grandmother's thoughts and feelings." Robert was touched by Catherine's generosity, but insisted that she should also keep a significant portion of the financial inheritance. After some discussion, they reached an agreement that satisfied both. Catherine would keep the jewelry, personal items, the diary, and half of the financial investments. Robert would take the other half of the investments and assume responsibility for caring for the carriage and the place where it was found, turning it into a small memorial for the Fitzgerald family. In the following days, Robert and Catherine worked together to authenticate the found documents and legally process the inheritance. They discovered that some of William's investments had appreciated enormously over the decades, making the discovery even more significant. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us, who are just starting out. Now continuing. The news of the discovery spread through the small community of Aspen, generating great interest and curiosity. The local newspaper published a story about the history, and soon several people began seeking out Robert and Catherine to hear more details about the discovery. Among the visitors was Michael Fitzgerald, Catherine's grandson, and William and Elizabeth's great-grandson. Michael, 35 years old, was a civil engineer in New York City and had grown up hearing fragments of the family story, but had never paid much attention to them. "Aunt Catherine," said Michael, examining the found documents, "I can't believe all this was hidden for so many years." "Neither can I, dear," replied Catherine. "Your great-grandmother Elizabeth was smarter than we imagined." Michael brought an interesting perspective to the discovery. As an engineer, he was impressed with the ingenuity of the underground construction created by William. The chamber had been designed to withstand moisture and time, demonstrating advanced technical knowledge for the era. "Great-grandfather William really thought of everything," commented Michael. "This construction could have preserved the documents for much longer." The discovery also brought forth more information about William's fate. Through additional historical research, they discovered he had indeed faced trouble in New York City, becoming involved in business disputes that became dangerous for his safety. Old records from the New York City Police Department showed William had sought police protection, reporting threats against his life from business competitors who wanted to force him to sell his properties at prices far below market value. "So he really was in danger," said Robert, reading the historical documents. "That's why he never returned home." Catherine found in Elizabeth's diary more details about the final months before William's departure. Her grandmother had recorded several conversations where her husband expressed concern about the family's safety and the need to protect the family heritage. Elizabeth had written, "William has been very worried lately. He constantly talks about protecting our family and our lands. Yesterday he showed me a special place where he hid something important, saying that if anything happened to him, I should look where our roots meet our history." This passage confirmed that William had carefully planned the preservation of the family inheritance, anticipating he might face difficulties on his trip to New York City. As the weeks passed, Robert developed a genuine friendship with Catherine and her family. The discovery of the carriage had created a special bond between them, uniting them through history and the extraordinary circumstances that brought them together. Catherine began visiting Robert's property regularly, helping him restore the carriage and create the memorial they had planned. She shared stories about her family and about life in the region in past decades, giving Robert a deeper understanding of his property's history. "You know, Mr. Robert," said Catherine during one of her visits, "I believe Grandfather William would be happy knowing his predictions came true. He always said the land would take care of the family, and in a way, that's exactly what happened." "How so?" "The land brought you to us," explained Catherine, "and through you, we finally discovered what Grandfather had prepared for our family. It's as if he had orchestrated all this from the beginning." Robert reflected on Catherine's words. There truly was something almost magical about how the events had unfolded. If Ranger hadn't sniffed out something strange that morning, if he hadn't decided to follow the dog, if Catherine hadn't decided to trust him with the family story, so many coincidences that resulted in the extraordinary discovery. The carriage restoration became a collaborative project involving several people from the community. A local carpenter specialized in antique furniture restoration offered his services to repair damaged wood parts. A metal craftsman took charge of polishing and restoring the golden ornaments. Catherine contributed historical details about the original colors and materials used in the carriage's construction. She still had a small sample of the original seat fabric, which had been kept by Elizabeth as a memento. "Grandma always kept small keepsakes from important things," explained Catherine, showing the fabric sample. "She said that one day they might be useful." The restoration process revealed additional details about the carriage's history. Beneath layers of old varnish, more engravings were found, including dates and initials that told the story of the vehicle from its construction to its abandonment in the woods. One of the most interesting discoveries was a small metal plate hidden under the driver's seat, engraved with the date 1943 and the words, "For Elizabeth, with eternal love, W.F." It was clearly a final message from William to his wife, a farewell permanently engraved in the vehicle that represented so many happy memories for the couple. Catherine cried when she saw the message. It was like receiving a final love letter from her grandfather to her grandmother, tangible proof of the deep affection that existed between them. "Grandpa really loved Grandma Elizabeth very much," she said, drying her eyes. "This message proves he knew he might not return, but wanted to leave something special for her." As the discovery story spread, other people from the region began sharing their own stories about the Fitzgerald family. Many elderly community members still remembered William and Elizabeth, describing them as a beloved and respected couple who had significantly contributed to the region's development. A retired merchant told how William had funded the construction of the area's first school. An elderly lady remembered Elizabeth organizing community festivals and helping needy families during difficult times. "They were very special people," said Mrs. Constance, an 82-year-old resident. "When Grandpa William disappeared, the entire community felt his absence, and Grandma Elizabeth was never the same after that." These stories added layers of meaning to Robert's discovery. The carriage and treasure weren't just valuable objects, but symbols of a family that had left a positive mark on their community. Robert decided that part of the found inheritance should be used to honor William and Elizabeth's memory in a way that would benefit the community. He proposed creating a small local museum where the carriage would be displayed, along with documents and photographs telling the Fitzgerald family story and their contribution to the region. Catherine was excited about the idea. "It would be a wonderful way to keep my grandparents' memory alive," she said. "They always believed in contributing to the community's well-being." Michael, the engineer grandson, offered to design and supervise the construction of the small museum. He suggested building it near where the carriage was found, creating a visitor center that would include both the museum and a memorial at the site of Elizabeth's former home. The museum project quickly began taking shape. The local community mobilized to support the initiative, with many people offering volunteer work, construction materials, and other necessary resources. The mayor of Aspen expressed interest in officially backing the project, seeing it as a way to promote historical tourism in the region. He offered assistance with required permits and approvals, as well as including the museum in the city's future tourism development plans. During the museum's preparation, Catherine continued studying Elizabeth's diary, uncovering more fascinating details about the family's life and the events leading to William's disappearance. In a particularly revealing passage, Elizabeth had written, "Today I received a letter from New York City informing me that my dear William was last seen leaving a hotel downtown. The authorities believe he may have tried to flee the city to avoid trouble with his business rivals. My heart is broken, but I hold on to hope that he is safe somewhere and might one day return home." This passage provided a new perspective on William's disappearance. Instead of being a victim of violence, it was possible he had managed to escape and chosen to remain hidden to protect his family. "Perhaps Grandpa lived many more years," speculated Catherine. "Maybe he settled in some distant place, always hoping it would be safe to return." Robert found this possibility touching and hopeful. The idea that William might have spent years thinking about his family and the legacy he had left them added a deeply human dimension to the story. The museum's construction progressed rapidly over the following months. Michael proved to be an excellent project manager, efficiently coordinating various aspects of the build and ensuring the final result properly reflected the historical importance of the discovery. The museum's design was planned to be both informative and emotionally impactful. The restored carriage would be the centerpiece, surrounded by explanatory panels telling the story of the Fitzgerald family, the discovery made by Robert and Ranger, and the historical significance of the found heritage. Catherine worked closely with a local curator to select and arrange the artifacts for display. Besides the photographs and documents found in the carriage and the underground chamber, she contributed other family items she had preserved over the years. One of the most precious items in Catherine's collection was a small gold brooch that had belonged to Elizabeth. The brooch was shaped like the family crest tree and was set with small gemstones that sparkled in the light. "Grandma always wore this brooch on special occasions," Catherine shared. "She said it was a way to carry the family's strength with her always." The brooch would be displayed in a special case, along with the golden key that had unlocked the hidden treasure and some of the most significant documents found. As the museum's opening date approached, excitement grew in the community. The project had become a symbol of how preserving local history could bring people together and create something positive for the entire region. Robert often reflected on how his life had changed since that morning when Ranger had sniffed something unusual in the woods. The discovery had not only provided him financial security, but had also created deep connections with people who had become genuinely important to him. "Ranger, you changed our lives," Robert said, petting the dog as they watched the museum construction progress. "If you hadn't decided to explore that part of the woods, none of this would have happened." Ranger seemed to understand the importance of his role in the discovery. The dog had become something of a local celebrity, with visitors often asking to see the dog who found the treasure. In the week before the museum's opening, Catherine made a final discovery in Elizabeth's diary that added one last touching element to the story. In one of the last entries, Elizabeth had written, "Today I dreamed of William. In the dream, he told me that our legacy would be found by someone with a pure heart, someone who would understand the importance of preserving our history and honoring our memory. He smiled and said our family tree would continue to grow through the kindness of strangers who would become family. Catherine read this passage to Robert on the eve of the opening, and both remained silent for several minutes, absorbing the profound meaning of the words. "It's as if she knew you would come," Catherine finally said, "as if this entire discovery had been planned far beyond what we can comprehend." Robert felt a shiver run down his spine. The accuracy of Elizabeth's prediction was almost unsettling in its precision. He had truly felt compelled to preserve the family's history and honor their memory from the moment he found the carriage. "Perhaps some things are meant to happen," he said thoughtfully. "Maybe what matters is being open to recognizing those opportunities when they present themselves." The opening of the Fitzgerald Carriage Museum took place on a sunny December morning. Hundreds of people from the local community and the region attended the event, including representatives from the municipal government, historians, journalists, and many curious onlookers who had followed the story through the local media. Catherine, wearing a blue dress that had belonged to Elizabeth and the family's gold brooch, was invited to cut the official opening ribbon. Her eyes shone with tears of joy as she officially declared open the museum dedicated to the memory of her grandparents. "This museum," she said in her opening speech, "is not just about the past. It's about how the past continues to live through the people who choose to honor and preserve the stories that came before us." Robert also spoke during the ceremony, telling the story of the discovery and expressing his gratitude for the opportunity to have been part of something so meaningful. "Sometimes," he said, "the most important treasures aren't made of gold or silver, but of human connections and the privilege of preserving history for future generations." Ranger, as a special guest of honor, received a special collar made by the local community, with a small engraved plaque bearing the words, "Discovery Hero 2025. The museum was an immediate success. Visitors were fascinated by the Fitzgerald family story, the ingenuity of the heritage preservation, and the serendipity of the discovery made by Robert and Ranger. The restored carriage was particularly impressive, its golden ornaments shining under the museum's special lighting. Visitors could walk around the vehicle, observing every detail and reading about its history through the informational panels. A special section of the museum was dedicated to the discovery process, with photographs documenting each step, from the moment Robert found the carriage to the opening of the underground chamber. Ranger appeared in many of the photographs, always alert and seeming to understand the importance of the events unfolding around him. In the months following the opening, the museum established itself as a respected tourist attraction in the region. Local schools began organizing educational visits, and tourists from other cities often included the museum in their itineraries when visiting Aspen. Catherine became the informal curator of the museum, often serving as a guide for special groups and sharing personal stories that weren't documented on the official panels. Her presence added a personal and emotional dimension to the visitor's experience. Robert continued to live on his property, but now with a completely different perspective on the land he owned. He had developed a deep appreciation for the history of the place and often received visitors interested in seeing where the discovery had been made. The area where the carriage was found was preserved as a small natural sanctuary with well-marked trails and explanatory plaques that told the story of the discovery. The site where Elizabeth's house had stood was marked with stones and transformed into a memorial garden, where Catherine planted flowers that her grandmother had cultivated decades before. Michael, the engineer grandson, decided to move to Aspen to be closer to his Aunt Catherine and to help with the ongoing administration of the museum. He established a small engineering office in town, specializing in historical preservation projects. "Aunt Catherine," Michael said during one of his visits to the museum, "I believe great-grandfather William and great-grandmother Elizabeth would be proud of what we've managed to create here." "I'm sure they would, dear," Catherine replied. "They always believed our family had the responsibility to contribute to something greater than ourselves." The story of the discovery continued to generate interest far beyond the local region. A documentary filmmaker from New York City expressed interest in creating a film about the events, and a local writer began working on a book that would expand the narrative with additional historical research. Catherine was approached by genealogists and historians interested in learning more about the Fitzgerald family and their influence in the region during the early 20th century. These investigations revealed that the family had been even more influential than initially thought, with business connections that extended throughout the state of New York. A particularly interesting discovery was that William had been one of the early investors in the construction of the railroad that connected Aspen with the rest of the state. Documents found in state archives showed that he had provided significant funding for the project, seeing it as crucial for the economic development of the region. "Grandpa was truly ahead of his time," Catherine commented upon learning this information. "He understood the value of infrastructure long before other business owners in the region." This discovery added another layer of meaning to the Fitzgerald family legacy. Not only had they contributed to the local community, but they had also played an important role in the broader economic development of the region. Robert often reflected on the extraordinary events that had transformed his life. The discovery of the carriage had given him not only financial security, but also a sense of purpose and connection to history that he had never experienced before. "You know, Ranger," he said during one of his morning walks through the property, "sometimes I think it wasn't us who found the carriage, but rather the carriage that found us." Ranger barked in response, as if agreeing with his owner's philosophical observation. The dog had become almost a living symbol of the discovery, often appearing in newspaper photographs and even being the subject of paintings created by local artists. With each visit to the museum, Robert felt a deep gratitude for the events that had led him there. He had started that September morning as a simple farmer living a quiet, routine life. Now he was part of a larger story, a guardian of important memories and a contributor to the preservation of local history. Catherine, now 73 years old, had found a new purpose in life through the museum and the preservation of her family's history. She often said that the last few months had been some of the most meaningful of her life, giving her the opportunity to honor the memory of her grandparents in a way she had never imagined possible. "Mr. Robert," she said during one of their conversations late one afternoon, "I believe we found more than a treasure in the woods. We found a family." Robert nodded, understanding perfectly what she meant. The discovery had created bonds that transcended the original circumstances, uniting people through a shared history and a common goal of preserving something important for future generations. As the sun set over the mountains around Aspen, Robert, Catherine, Michael, and Ranger often gathered at the site where the carriage had been found. There, surrounded by the woods that had guarded secrets for so many decades, they reflected on the mysteries of life and how seemingly random events can turn out to be deeply meaningful. The golden carriage, now restored and preserved for posterity, continued to shine under the museum lights, telling its story to visitors of all ages. But its true legacy went far beyond the golden ornaments and polished wood. It had become a symbol of how the past and present can connect in unexpected ways, creating opportunities to preserve important memories and build new human connections. Elizabeth Fitzgerald had written in her diary that she hoped someone would one day find the treasure hidden by her husband. She could never have imagined that this discovery would happen more than 80 years later, through a farmer and his faithful dog, resulting in a legacy that would benefit an entire community. The gleam that had first caught Robert's attention on that September morning had revealed much more than he could ever have imagined. It wasn't just the gleam of gold on the carriage ornaments, but the gleam of a story that had patiently waited to be told, of memories that had been preserved through time, and of human connections that proved more valuable than any material treasure. As the years passed, the story of the carriage discovery became part of the local folklore, told and retold to visitors and residents. Robert and Ranger became legendary figures in the region, symbols of how curiosity and determination can lead to extraordinary discoveries. Catherine lived many more years, always proud of the museum, and how her family's history had been preserved. In her later years, she often said that she had finally found peace, knowing that the memory of William and Elizabeth would continue to live on through future generations. The museum continued to thrive, becoming not only a tourist attraction, but also a center for historical research and a symbol of how communities can come together to preserve their cultural heritage. And the golden carriage, with its ornaments eternally shining under the museum lights, remained as a reminder that sometimes the most valuable treasures are not the ones we seek, but those that find us when we are ready to recognize their importance. End of story. Dear listeners, what an incredible journey we've followed along with Robert, Ranger, and Catherine. This story shows us how small moments can change our entire lives. And you, what did you think of this extraordinary discovery? Have you ever experienced a situation where fate seemed to be guiding your steps? Share with us in the comments your own stories of unexpected discoveries. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more exciting stories like this one.